All right, if you haven't heard, if you look up on the screen here, if we get out the snow that they're saying we're going to get by Thursday, there'll be 20 inches. All right, I don't know if we're going to get half that, all that, it doesn't really matter. But I've already talked to Mr. Corrigan, and I know that at least one of you, because Christopher's mentioned this to me, but I don't know how far, with the rest of you, how far you have to drive. Typically, they make a decision by around 5:30 in the morning if they're going to cancel school. But if you don't know this already, hopefully are you all signed up for the ranking notification system? All right, you should get something on there. It also should be posted on the website. But I wouldn't, for 100% for sure, count on the website. All right, but you should get a message. Now, what I did then this morning was I set up a Microsoft Teams for this class. All right, and I'm going to click send right now, and you all should get a thing in here sooner or later. You might get it right away. It might take a bit, but a thing for class on Wednesday. If it does, if it's not as bad as they say, and we have class, then that thing is moot. All right, but for instance, let's say we get half that, and Christopher's like, I'm not driving in this, but a couple of the rest of you come in here. What I don't like, just so you know, what they did like 2 years ago, we got banged real hard with a storm here, and they waited until there were 5 inches of snow on the ground, and then they canceled. That ticked me off. I don't have that long of a drive, but when I go home, I've got to go up one of 2 hills, and I didn't like that at all, to be honest with you. And I picked the wrong one to go up, to be honest with you. I made it up, but I was damn lucky to make it up. All right. So my hope is that they will know by then. If they do, I'm still planning on lecturing, but with Microsoft Teams, it's remote from inside of your own house, and it'll be recorded. So if you don't watch, you don't watch. But as far as I'm concerned, maybe I shouldn't do it this way, but I'm just going to mark you as being here because everybody's here every day, virtually anyway. All right. Okay. Okay. It's really blurry. Thank you. Thank you. And, we should have a better idea. If you didn't hear, tomorrow it's supposed to just 100% chance of rain all day. And this is supposed to start tomorrow night sometime, I think late at night, like after midnight. All right? Which isn't great because, honest to goodness, my daughter is flying back from LA tomorrow night. So I'm not real happy about that, but whatever. All right. So I should be able to let you know by Wednesday. And if Wednesday it looks like it's snowing all day and they think they're going to call it Thursday, I'll set up another one of these for Thursday. Does that make sense? All right. What I'm going to do then, what I've decided the way I want to do this, is we are going to go over Lesson 4. Now, you've already heard this, but Lesson 4 is 125 pages. I'm going to go over the first, it's either 44 or 45 pages today. The first 44 pages today. That's it. And it probably will take no more than an hour. The rest of the period will be lab. Tomorrow, I'm going to go over pages 45 to, I've got it here, but it's like 45 to 85. Okay? And then Wednesday, I'll finish it up. Does that all make sense? All right. So as you can see, this is entitled User Experience. Now, the first part of this, much of the stuff that's in here, I'm not going to spend too much time on because, for instance, they talk about when you create a button, the difference between a flat button and a raised button. It's not really that important, to be honest with you, and I don't mean to downplay it, but it's really not that big of a thing. And we also talk about a fab. I've mentioned these to you before, which is a floating action button. So that's what's in here. Then in the next section, 4.2, which we'll also go over today, they talk about some of the widgets or controls we haven't talked much about or not at all, such as they talk about checkboxes in here, they talk about radio buttons in here, they talk about spinners, which I had you look at already as a preface to being able to understand this, and they talk about switches. I think that's, and they also talk about, I think, edit text. All right, so some of the stuff, like I said, we've covered, some of it we haven't. All right, so I've got my own little, I've underlined here, and I got my own little cheat sheets. So as it says, the UI that appears on the screen consists of a hierarchy of views. Everything you put on the screen is known as a view. It's the basic class to do everything. All right, and again, like I said, for now we're just going to talk mainly about buttons. Now, they mention in here, I don't want to read to you, but there's a lot of different ways that you can basically communicate with users in an Android program. All right, probably the most common one is still, most of the time, is clicking a button. However, you know this. When you start getting it and you transition over to a phone, button might not be the best way of doing something. You might flip and you might do, whatever. So they will talk a little bit in here about things like gestures and even talking. All right? Okay. Now, here's the key thing. When you design an app, it should be intuitive. Where the controls are should be intuitive. What the controls do should be intuitive. I don't think that's a big surprise to anybody. All right? And they even mention most people, after they've used an Android app once or twice, expect things to be in certain places and to react in certain ways. All right, so as it says in this chapter, you learn how to create buttons and clickable images. All right, so they talk about a button with text only, they talk about a button with an image only, and they talk about a button with both an image and text, and they show you how to do that. All right, what's becoming much more prevalent today than it used to be are the ones in the middle. For instance, if you've ever done that where you've gone out to a shopping cart site, it may still say cart. Sometimes it does, like Amazon still says cart, but then they've got a little image of a shopping cart. All right, and inside of the cart they have how many things you've got in it, type of an idea. All right. Now, one of the key things in here, one of the reasons I believe Mr. Smith so much wanted to use this book is they have great hyperlinks. They really and truly do. Later on in this series of PDFs, I'm not going to even click it now, but they'll talk about the Android material design specification. All right? And it says Android button elements have to follow that spec, and it says you will learn more in another lesson, and we will. All right? Okay. So buttons have 3 states: normal, disabled, and pressed. Okay? And raised buttons are the ones we use virtually all the time. All right? And what they'll talk about in here is they say, hey, if you don't have the ability to do this, this is what you'd have to add. Well, we've got the ability to do this. All right? So I think, again, that in a way that whole idea that they talk about here is kind of moot. All right. So they've got a thing in here that says, excuse me, the creating a raised button with text and then creating a raised button with an icon and text. I will tell you, you don't have to do it right now, but I would like you, when you get some time, to go through these steps that are on pages 4 through 7. What do I mean? It says expand app res in the project Android plane, or command click the drawable folder. Then when you do this, because this is what I want to show you in here, all right? As it says, configure image asset. There are probably in the area of about 50 built-in icons that you can use. You can add your own as well. But as it says in here, it says, notice it says action bar and tab icons. And if you click over here, there'll be other ones, all right? And this is what it is. Now notice it's got asset type, image, clip art, and text. It'll go to image if you're using your own. All right, if you've got your own where you've created text, it'll be there. But for the example here, it's clip art. All right, and notice you can add padding right away. You can change the theme right away if you want to or feel you need to do that. And typically, and again, this won't make a lot of sense now, but it'll make sense later when we try to go and actually push something out to the App Store. All right, there is an extra high density pixelation, there's an extra high, there's a high, and there's a medium. And it all has to do with the size of the medium you're using. So in other words, if I was using like maybe an iPad, a bigger iPad, I would have the XX. If I was using an older like flip phone or an older phone, I guess you can't even use flip phones anymore, but an older phone, I'd use the MDPI. And again, hopefully that makes sense. All right, when you bring this up, this is what you get here, is what's shown on page 6. Okay? Now, these are regular images. When I say the regular images, they're regular clip art images. They also show you in here how you can do this, but instead of using regular images, you can use vector images. All right, and typically they'll look the same. The difference between these standard images and vector images is vector images scale based on the size of the medium in which you're looking at it. All right, and these regular clip art images, of course, they do not scale. All right. So again, they go through the steps on pages 4, 5, 6, and 7. I'm going to let you look at that yourselves, because that's going to make more sense then. So after they do that, then they talk about doing this and choosing the new vector asset. It's just rather than choosing new asset, you choose new vector asset, but the way you do it after that is pretty much the same way. All right? Okay. All right, then they go through and they tell you how you can make this button with an alarm clock on it and the word alert if you want to look at that. That's all fine and dandy. And again, notice if you look up on the screen here, I'm on page 9. It says if you're not familiar with Android's style and theme system, you should read Style and Themes. All right? For information about the Holo themes here's the key ones, these two. For a guide on styling and customizing buttons using XML, you can click there. And if you just want to know about designing buttons, period, you can go there. And again, why would you really care? Why would you want to do that? Well, again, when you're doing your final project, you might want to do something special with buttons. All right? Now, the next one is a flat button. If you look up on the screen here, it says use Google's location service, and when you go down there, those are buttons. They just don't look like buttons. They look like hyperlinks, the way they've got them styled. All right? And then they go and they show you how you can do that. I'm not saying you would never, ever do that. All right, you could. There might be a really good reason for doing that. I'm just not going to go over it because virtually all the stuff that we do in here, there probably won't be a reason to do that. All right, so responding to click events. Guess what they talk about in here? The 2 ways you can respond to click events. By putting onClick in your XML file. All right, so when you've got your activity main, for example, going over to your properties window, finding the onClick and typing something in there. And that's what they show here. And the other one is using the button design or button listener design pattern. And that's when you do the view.onClick listener. They both virtually do the same thing. All right. And I've had students who told me, I don't even like using this listener. It's too hard. Do I have to do it? No. If you get it to work with all with onClicks, that's okay. The thing is, if you ever were to go out in the industry, I think at least, you're hardly ever going to see onClick there. You're going to always be seeing it through the button listener design pattern. All right? But at least you have been exposed to both of them. All right? Okay. And they go through the whole process, using the view find by ID, setting it up in here, etc. You can see all this. All right? Now, what you can do, they're going to talk about this in just a minute with image views, but what you can do to virtually any control, or also known as widgets, that you put on for your interface, is you can add non-click to it, virtually anything. So if you've got an image and you want that image to act more or less like a button, you can add non-click to it. All right? Now, typically when you're going to do this, as it says right here, all right, the reason that you want to have a button is because you want it to react to something. All right, and again, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's things like, okay, if you're going to create a button and the button is going to have text on it, the text should be symbolic of what happens when you press the button. That should make sense. All right, and that's the kind of thing that I expect, all right, when you're creating this stuff. All right, and here, again, they say using the event listener interface for other events. It's what I just told you. Now, when you look here, there are other events too. This is the one we've talked about right here. I'm on page 13. The view.onClick listener. There's a view.onLongClick listener. Typically when the user presses down for 2 or more seconds on something. So if you wanted something to happen on a phone, but only if you press down. You say, I don't know what you mean. If you've never done this before, A lot of times you've got to use a long click, like if, at least I do on my phone, if I want to do a copy and paste. All right, typically if I do a long click, it'll copy everything that it's on the screen or currently, and then I can do another one and paste, paste it someplace. All right, there's an on-touch listener. So if you decide that for your final project, what you want to do is some kind of a game, you might be doing something where you're implementing the touch stuff. All right? All right. On focus change, notice what it says. Handles when focus moves away from the current view as a result of an interaction, typically by you clicking a key. Trackballs are still used, all right, but typically they're used for people who have a hard time working with just about anything else, all right? And I don't say that to be mean, but when you've got someone with limited mobility, all right, some of them still use trackballs, all right. And as it says, there's also an on-key listener, handles when a key on a hardware device is pressed while the view has focus. You could set something up, for example, we set up in the C# class where you would put the, like when you created a button, like an exit button, we said E&XIT, so you can do an Alt-X. You can set up the same kind of thing in here. All right. Then again, as it says, you could turn any view into an image view, as an image view into a button by adding the on-click. All right, the image must be stored in the drawable folder. And they go through an example on how to do that. They actually have their pictures. These are some of the previous versions here of Android. And they go in there and they make all of those clickable images. All right. And you'll see with each one of these, what is it? Well, look, here's an image view, there's an on-click. Here's an image view, there's an on-click. Here's an image view, there's an on-click. So like I said, it's not like it's a real big surprise, at least in my opinion, as far as how to do this. I think that you can all do it without really any kind of problem. All right. Okay, next is that fab. There's two ways that you can create a project with a fab. Here's the fab down here, if you look up on the screen. Okay, one is not choose the empty activity, but you can say in here. If you start your project or activity using the basic activity template instead of empty, it automatically adds this fab. That's the only difference right there between an empty activity and the basic one is this fab or floating action button that's down there. You can change the size of that button. You can change what's inside of that button. You can change the color of the button, etc. And what they mentioned in here, and I wholeheartedly agree with them, is you should only use this if there's some basic action that you want to have happen. For instance, later on in the semester, we'll create a simple to-do list in Android, okay? And we'll have a fab in here. And whenever you click the fab, that'll allow you the ability to add a new to-do. Does that make sense? And again, you can read the stuff that's in here yourself. So it says you can also add a floating action button yourself. So if you chose empty activity, you can go and put it in like this. All right. It's just another icon that you're adding, or another control, I should say. Notice by default they're 56 by 56 dp in size, and it says you should use that size unless you've got a reason not to. It says the mini size there, notice, is 30 by 40. Okay. All right. As always, for more instructions, it says there, go to Component Buttons, Floating Action Button, which is in the Material Design spec. All right. Gestures, I'm not going to lie to you. I've done very little stuff with gestures. I have had students who have done their final project and done some kind of stuff with gestures. Some of them have gotten it to work. Some of them have had nothing but problems with it. As it says here, the Gestures Design Guide shows you how to design common gestures for apps. And there are code samples and details under the Using Touch Gestures in the Android developer documentation. All right. I'm not going to say really anything more about it. Not having used it very much, I don't feel real comfortable talking about it, to be honest with you. All right. So I'm going to jump all the way up then to page 23. All right. So on page 23 here that you can see, 24 I guess. So on page 24 is the second part of the chapter. All right. And in here, this is what they're going to talk about. Input controls, checkboxes, radio buttons, the spinner, toggle buttons and switches, text input, okay? So once we get past this, about 20 pages, we're done for today. I am going to show you what we're going to talk about and what we're going to actually end up doing together in here. All right, we'll do that at the end. So, as it says, this chapter introduces input controls. The basic ones are shown here. Okay? Now, number one that you see right there is edit text. You're familiar with that one. You've used that one already. Number 6 that's in here. All right, number 6 is the spinner. So you've used both of those already. In other programming languages, you've used checkboxes, radio buttons, etc., but not in here, to my knowledge. All right, what we're going to end up doing, either, I don't know if we'll do it tomorrow, if we'll do it Wednesday, or if we'll do it Thursday, I don't know. But we're going to create a very simple project. It's not going to do much, but it's going to have almost all these controls on it. All right, and then when you put all, when you go and you put something into all these different controls, then we'll also create a button that's got an image on it. And when you click on that, it's just going to show a toast that shows everything you've inputted. Does that make sense? Just so you get an idea of how to work with each one of these. All right? The one that sometimes at least gives people some pause, for lack of better words, is number 2 here, the seek bar. All right? So let's suppose for a second, I'm not doing this, but let's suppose you've done in the C# class, and we've done it together, something where you set a minimum grade to 0 and a maximum grade to 100. And then 90 to 100 is an A, 80 to 89 is a B, etc. You get the idea. All right? We could do something like that with a seek bar. So this would be the min that you'd set right here to 0. The max you'd set to 100. And this would be what its current value would be. And you can take that and you can basically set up the equivalent of like a text view to show you where you are at any time and then what the grade is, for example. What I've typically had people do in the past, and I'm looking for a copy, I found one that I did a couple years ago. I just don't like it, so otherwise I'll redo it. And you maybe have seen this already. We're going to make a simple tip calculator. So in other words, you'll put down how much money your bill was. Okay, so $35.12. All right? And then what we'll do is we'll have a seek bar where you can put a tip in there. Now, I always just set it up to like 0 to 25%. I mean, if you say, no, I always tip more, I don't care, then you can just change the number. All right, it's not that big a thing. It's just what you use for the max. So as you'd guess, if it was $35 and let's just say that the service was okay, I want to give 20%. That'll be $7. So it would say $35. You would choose that with the seek bar, and then it would fill in down below that $7, and then down below that it would have your entire bill. Does that all make sense? All right, so we'll do something like that. All right, the checkbox works exactly the way you think it would work. The big thing about radio buttons is you virtually have to put radio buttons into a radio button group. All right, if you put 3 radio buttons on the screen and they're not in a group, as far as the system is concerned, you're checking 3 different things. Does that make sense? All right. All right, the switch, as it says, it's pretty simple. It's just is something on or off. And they talk about virtually every one of these in here. All right. So turning up to page 25 here, it says input controls for making choices. You should know this by now. A checkbox allows you to choose 0 or more. A radio button allows you to choose just 1. All right. The toggle and the switch is just on or off. All right. So for example, let's just assume that you were setting up some kind of a service and people have the choice of, let's just say, free or paid type of thing. You could take something like that and set it up as a toggle button or a switch, just as an example. The spinner, like I said, we've already taken a look at, so there shouldn't be a lot of new stuff in there. All right. They talk about focus in here. Again, I believe you all know what focus is. We have already looked at using request focus, to set the cursor into a certain widget. All right? And as it says, you can put it on any view that is focusable. Some things are not focusable. That makes no sense to click on them. All right. So what's the difference between focusable and clickable, as they say right here? All right. Focusable view is allowed to gain focus from a touch screen, external keyboard or other keyboard input device, and a clickable view is one that reacts to being tapped or clicked. All right. Now, if you look at here, one of the things I like about this particular PDF is they try to give you some overall guidelines, and they say, hey, this is, for lack of better words, this is the way it works. So this is what you should be doing. Such as, notice what it says there in the 2 bullet points. First, make it visually clear which view has the focus so that the user knows where the input goes. Secondly, explicitly set the focus in your code. You want to make sure, in much the same way that we set the tab order in C#, you can do a similar type of thing in here. So as the person works their way around. Now, what's the difference? Well, you can actually set it up in here for the focus so that you could just tab, the same way we did it in C#. You can also set it up so you can use your keypad. All right. In other words, you can use your right arrow and your left arrow keys too to go back and forth. All right. It says, fortunately, in most cases, you don't need to control the focus yourself. Android provides touch mode for devices that will respond to a touch. All right. So again, you can take a read on that if you have an interest. There is a focus up and a focus down. If you want some control over how all this stuff works. Okay. All right. It says also you can explicitly set the focus or find out which view has the focus by using the methods that are shown here on the bottom of page 27. Again, not my goal here to sit and read to you. All right. But there may be a very important reason that you have to use one or more of these. All right. Okay. Checkboxes, again, you're all smart enough to realize this. When they wrote this, they have no idea whether or not the people reading it have ever worked with this stuff in other languages. You have. So there's not a whole heck of a lot in here to talk about with checkboxes. All right, you've set them up before. Now it says, users expect checkboxes to be in a vertical list like a to-do list side by side. That may be true. All right, but if there's only 2 or 3, a lot of times you'll see them horizontal as well. All right, it doesn't really matter which way you do it. What's kind of nice is they show you here exactly how they set this up. All right, this is one of those things, not that you have to keep track of it, but it's on page 28. So if on your next programming assignment, you're asked to set up checkboxes, you know exactly where to go then. All right. All right. Typically, it says programs receive the state of each checkbox when the user taps or clicks a submit button or a done button. All right. So again, they show you exactly what would happen. Then they're showing you in here, okay, if you want to find out which one of these was checked, all right, there's the code. Now, notice that all 3 of these are in their own if statement, because you know this, with a checkbox, you can what? Select 0 of them, any 1 of them, any 2 of them, or all 3 of them. So you've got different possibilities. Don't take something like this and put it into an if-else. It doesn't make any sense to do that. All right. And then finally, towards the bottom here, it says, for more information about checkboxes, see checkboxes in the Android developer documentation. And they're going to show this in virtually everything that they're working on in here. That's one of the nice things about, again, about this PDF, is that it's hyperlinked up the wazoo. All right. So, next, radio buttons. You already know this, but radio buttons imply mutual exclusivity. All right. In other words, only one is pressed at a time. So when you choose the delivery method here, all right, you can only pick one of these. On the other hand, if you say, you know, which methods work for you, and it could be 0, 1, or both, 0, 1, or 2 of these, all right, you would use checkboxes instead. All right. And again, you know this back from your days in C#. You basically, almost everything that you do for checkboxes, you also do for radio buttons, all right? The only big thing that's different here is, again, they're typically set up inside of a radio group. So if you look here, I'm on page 30. Notice up at the top, there's your radio group, all right? You know, and I've been asked this, well, will it work if I don't put them in a radio group? I've never tried it because I was told to put them in a radio group, all right? But they show you how to build this right here on page 29. All the code is here on page 30, all right? And then on the bottom of page 30 here it says, the click handler method must be public, must return void, and define a view as its only parameter. It says the following shows one click handler for all the radio buttons in the radio group. So again, notice, and did you have to do it with a switch? It could have been done with an if also, all right? But you're only going to have, in this case, 3, all right? So it probably makes more sense to set it up as a switch, but an if would work fine, all right? And then finally, as it says here, for more information about radio buttons, see the radio buttons section in the Android developer documentation. Now, I apologize for this, but I probably should have told you, I don't know where you found out your information on spinners. Everybody got it to work, and it's not that it's that difficult. Maybe you just went out to the Android documentation, but I should have said, hey, you can go out to Lesson 4 because it'll be in there. All right. I know that when I did this last time, I gave this assignment, the one that you guys had, I gave it later, after we talked about this already. But I figured where we were in the book, or our book, or whatever you call this thing, it made more sense to have you do it when I assigned it. All right. As it says, a spinner provides a quick way for the user to select one or more values from a set. Now, it always has to be for a finite number of things that you select. That should make sense to everybody. That would be a finite number. And it does allow you to work your way through it. In the example that I used for the spinner, I've got all the states. That's not really a good example if you have to work your way down 50 states. You know, so if you're looking for West Virginia or Wisconsin or Wyoming, that's a long way to have to go down. But you can use it for that. They recommend using it for something that's somewhere between 3 and 10. In fact, what they say in here is if you want it to be 3 or less, you really should use a radio button. All right? And 4 to above that, then you should use a spinner. Again, they reference the spinner guide here on page 32, and they go through the whole process. I don't think I have to do this with you guys because you've done it. All right? You all created that with a calculator. All right? What is new in here, and I mentioned this in class, all right, and I did not take off if you didn't do it, but they have this array here. And here's where they show you. So this right here, if you've not done this before, you want to look on page 33 in the handout here, because that would go in your strings.xml file. All right, so you're setting up in here an actual string array that's going to hold those different values that are in there. All right. And then here's the on-item selected listener interface. Again, that's all put in there. All right, that's all explained in much more depth and breadth of coverage than I'm doing it right now. All right, you know when you use this, you have to use an adapter. They liken in here an adapter to be like a memory card reader, and where they say the memory card reader is kind of your go-between with the memory card itself and the machine. It's kind of what the adapter is. It just makes sure that the different parts of your program can communicate with one another. All right. And they even give you, again, here's the code that responds to spinner selections. They explain to you in here what everything is. The toggle buttons, there may be a really good reason to use one of these. And I mean, actually, the example they give here is pretty good. I wouldn't use a toggle button, I'd use a switch. But if you've ever gone into the settings for your phone, you might notice that a lot of times, like Bluetooth, etc., you can push back and forth to turn it on or off. Usually that's done with more or less the equivalent of a switch right here. Toggle buttons are buttons. That's why I don't think they make that much sense. But the switches, there might be a very valid reason for using those. All right, but again, that should be something that's either on or off. positive or negative, true, false, whatever way you want to look at it. All right? So they go through both the toggle button and the switch, and that jumps us all the way up to page 38. All right, and on this page here, they are talking about using the edit text. I read through this and I didn't think there was anything new in here. All right. The only thing that we have not really talked a lot about, and I plan on doing this when we go through an example later this week, I have shown you how to go and add a control and just drag it in, all right, from design mode, and I've shown you how you can create a control using actual XML. But as far as how you position things on a page, you can be much more intricate when you actually use XML and say what you want to link this up to. We're going to take a look at that later on this week. All right. You know that by default, when you use a text view, it thinks that you're going to have a single line of text. But you can set the max lines, and there's also other things that you can do. All right. It says by default, the edit text view allows multiple lines as shown in the figure. And it suggests, it'll even try to suggest for you words, some kind of a spell check or whatever you want to say. All right, so I suggest, I guess. All right. As it says here, you can set it up to the input type, the text short message. There's a text long message. There's a bunch of different ways that you can do this. Now, you may not have agreed with this, and I don't know if it was any of you or if it was one or both of the other two, but I took off last time if you didn't set your keyboard up correctly. We did talk about that back on day one. So if, for instance, if we, for the calculator, if you were asking for number 1 or number 2, there's no reason to make that anything but a numeric keypad. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. And they go through there, and this is the done key. By default, it looks like the checkbox that you see here. I'm on the bottom of page 40. But you can change it, and then you can make it an emoji, and there's a bunch of other stuff you can do. All right. I kind of look at it this way, that I don't have you in this class for all that long, and if you want to learn how to go and make emojis or make your own emoji thing or whatever, that you'd be able to do that on your own. All right. The attributes for customizing the edit text. So these are some of the ones that are right here. Okay, so notice capital characters, capital sentences, multi-line I've shown you already. Passwords should just make sense. The number we already mentioned. All right. Getting user input, bottom here of page 42. As it says, to use the user's input in your app, set the layout and code by following these steps. I don't want to read to you. Why? Because we've done this already. This is nothing new. Remember that if you are converting something over from an integer to a string, that you have to run it through the .toString. We've talked about that before. All right. Now, there's two ways that you can convert things. You can create something from an integer to a string. All right. But you can also, so let's say that I had in here 34, but I had it in double quotes. With me? So that actually isn't the number 34. All right. It is the string 34. If I wanted to convert the string 34 to the number 34, I could, for example, type in string dot value of, and then put in the parentheses, double quote, 34, double quote, and that would turn it, all right, that would convert it over. All right, there's an example in here. They talk about it in here. The last thing that's in here, and I'm sorry they waited this long to go through it, and I'm sorry they gave it this little bit of play, but this is the last 2 pages in here, page and a half. Customizing the keyboard, all right? And then they're showing you how you can set it up for email, for phone, dates and times, etc. You can combine these things if you want to do this, all right? But the very bottom of the page, bottom half of page 43, going on to page 44, which is going to end this for right now. But it says the action key for an edit text keyboard is the done or return key. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes it's a pain in the butt when you have to keep clicking at the bottom to make the keyboard go away so that you can actually see where your buttons are. All right, there are ways that you can go through there. By default, there are ways. I have not done that in a while, but I believe there's a way that if you want to, you can turn off the keyboard. Are you with me? You can turn off the keyboard, meaning you can only use your regular keyboard on your computer itself. All right, that's not recommended to do that because most people who run your app are going to be probably using a phone. All right, and that's probably not going to be what you want. But they don't really go through that in here, but there are different ways you can do that. All right, so I did that kind of quickly. I get it. Tomorrow the whole thing is on this section, menus and pickers. But I think that this is just more digestible in smaller chunks, so to speak. So tomorrow we'll go through, and this section right here is 40 pages. All right, and as it says, it's on menus and pickers. And notice types of menus, the app bar and the options menus, contextual, pop-ups, dialogues, and pickers. That'll be 40 pages. When we get to that, that'll bring us up to page, I think it's 85 where the last part starts. That'll be on user navigation. So we will go through user navigation on Wednesday. We'll either do it together, all right, and we'll be here if the weather isn't that bad, or I'll do it online, and again, it'll be saved. Questions? All right, that's all that I had. Like I said, I had no idea how long this would take. I figured it'd be somewhere upwards of an hour. So.